Welcome back to Reflection. I'm your host, Ed Blonsky. You know, we all reflect the things that are most important in our lives. And the things that shine the brightest on our lives are the things that are reflected brightest in and through our lives. So on this podcast, I have conversations with people in whom God has made a difference, in whom God has equipped to make a difference in other people's lives as they reflect Him to this world. My goal is that you will be encouraged to see how God can use you to change your life and to change the lives of others as you reflect Him in this dark world. Today, I am joined by an author and a poet named Tanner Olson. I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation today, so thanks for joining me on today's episode of Reflection. In the pastor's office with me today is Tanner Olson. Welcome, Tanner.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good, and I'm glad that you are here. Tanner is an author and a speaker, and we're going to talk about his authoring and his speaking on today's episode, and we're going to talk about how he reflects God in this world, because that's what this podcast is all about. So I'm really thankful that he's joined us today in the pastor's office. So you know you better than anyone else, perhaps other than your mother, and she's not here. So I'm going to ask you to tell us about you. Give us a little history, a biography of Tanner Olson.
Sure. Well, I'm just happy to be here. Like you said, I'm an author, I'm a speaker, I'm a poet, I'm a podcaster, I'm a lot of different things, but really I'm just a guy. I grew up in Oviedo, Florida, so grew up down there, and then after growing up, I guess I'm still growing up, I went to Concordia University, Wisconsin, because that's the normal thing to do, is to leave Florida for Wisconsin. But I studied youth ministry and theology at Concordia University, Wisconsin, and had been writing throughout middle school and high school and college. Then after I graduated, I bounced around from a couple of different ministry positions. I worked at a camp in northern Wisconsin called Camp Luther. I was helping with some church plants down in Austin, Texas. Even spent a little bit of time at Chick-fil-A, really just to solidify my spot in heaven. But just did a lot of different things, but all the while I was writing. And then in 2019, I released my first book of poetry and started traveling and speaking and sharing poetry at churches and schools and houses and coffee shops. And I've been doing that really, for the last several years. And now I've got 4 books out and a couple more on the way. And things are steady, things are rolling. But it is just a joy to be able to be a writer in this world.
A little background there. When did you graduate from Concordia?
2012.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, yeah. So I'm an 87 grad.
Oh, we just missed each other.
Yeah. You're making me feel not young, my friend. But it is a wonderful school. So you were on the campus in Mequon, which, of course, is an absolutely gorgeous campus. If my listeners have not been there, it's certainly well worth the trip, just north of Milwaukee. And then were you a member of Mount Olive in Florida?
No, I went to St. Luke's, Oviedo.
St. Luke's, okay. St. Luke's,
yep.
Very good.
Yep.
I knew a vicar back in the late 80s, I think it was, early 90s at there. So, and he was there in Florida. So that was Jeff Meyer, and he's been on the show as well. He was
great.
in last season episode. So, and I've got a student coming up. You're coming up after a student from Concordia, a current student, and then I also had the director, church ministry director, Kurt Taylor from Concordia. It's a small Lutheran synod that we belong to, and so we know everybody.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about your poetry. That's how I was introduced to you, through mutual friends into poetry, and I do have to. I'm a little geeking out a little bit as a fan, meeting some of the people that I read. I love that. It's neat to put a face with the name and the writings of it. How did you get into that? How did you get into writing poetry?
Yeah, well, growing up, I really I've always loved words. There's always been something about them, the way that they make you feel, the way that they shift your insides, and the way that they just kind of open up your world to new things. But I remember in middle school, I really loved punk rock music. I still do, loved punk rock music. But what I loved most about it was the lyrics. And so I thought, well, maybe I could be in a band one day. So I tried to play guitar, I tried to sing, and I'm not musically inclined. It's terrible. Like, it's never, when I sing or try to play music, it just never really goes well. So music really wasn't in my future, but I thought, well, maybe there was something about words. Like, could I be a poet? And so early on in middle school, I just kind of kept writing and filling notebooks. And then in college one year, I saw a poet perform. And when he stepped out onto the stage and delivered this poem, I thought, oh, maybe that's something that I could do, is deliver poetry for an audience. And so it's kind of started a couple of years ago, and just seeing him perform made me think that I could do it as well. And so I put my own spin on it and do it my own different way. But the dream's been alive for quite a while. And to have the opportunity to share poetry with an audience of people, and to invite them into hope, into joy, into just rest, is it's a wonderful thing. So I'm so thankful that I get to do this for a job, and I don't know, doing interviews like this just makes it all feel all too real.
It's interesting. You're a full-time poet. I mean,
Yeah.
that isn't, when I think of careers, I can't even envision how does your day work? I mean, do you just get up and start writing?
Well, I would say it's probably similar for you, for like as a pastor, and you tell people you're a pastor, and like, oh, and so they make the joke, oh, you work one day a week, which is not a funny joke, because we know that you work 2 days a week. So it's like, but for me, so it is maybe 10% writing. The other 90% is I'm booking events. I am creating, social media posts. I'm responding to messages and emails. I'm doing podcasts. I'm sending out merch. I'm wearing all these different hats in order to make the one thing go, like in order to be a full-time poet. And so, I often say that I'm an author, poet, and a speaker, because I do speaking events, and, I have a couple of friends who are musicians, and we travel around the country and host evenings of music and poetry. And so there's a lot of like innovation, and honestly, like, I feel like I am building the plane in the air, just trying to keep this thing rolling, and kind of seeing where it takes me.
That's brings another thought to mind. What is it? You have a brand, and so
Sure.
that's part of that. Where does the inspiration come from? I read, I think it was your blog post yesterday or a couple of days ago about you were eating pancakes.
Yeah, the diner. Yeah.
Yeah. What was that? That was so amazing that all of a sudden, in the middle of that, something happens. Is that where the inspiration, or is that where the magic happens?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've been learning and relearning and telling myself is just to pay attention. I think if I talk to a lot of schools, and I'm in classrooms, and even talking with groups of writers, and they say, like, where do you find your inspiration, or how can I be inspired? And my answer is just pay attention. And it's a very simple answer, but if you keep your eyes up and you're looking for stories, or you're looking for things to write about, or you're looking for what's interesting or what's normal. I read earlier this week of, like, what is the job of a poet? And the job of the poet is really just to put in front of your eyes what you already know. But it's like just to move you just a little bit, just to see, just to lean in. The job of the poet is not to tell you what to think, what to feel, or what to believe, but it's to remind you of what's already inside of you. The things that you already know to be true, but have somehow gotten buried throughout the day. And so, yeah, the diner story was a lot of fun. I spent a lot of time writing at coffee shops or diners, because that's where people are. And if you want to find a good story, you gotta leave your house.
Absolutely agree, 100%. It's the same thing with crafting a sermon. Mm-hmm. It's not done, even though I'm in my office, and I do write here. I keep my journal, or I'll record something on my phone where I am somewhere. I'm at the coffee house, or I'm in the park, or in the forest preserve. I like to do some walking when I can, and it's amazing if you just open your eyes how much is really out there. Why do you think God has called you to do this? You are a man of faith, and how is it? And the question is really, why you? Why has God called you, Tanner, to do all this?
That's a great question. I always joke, and maybe it's not really a joke, but when I was growing up, I wanted to be in the NBA. I love basketball. If you could see my office, it's nothing but NBA stuff all around me. Absolutely love it, but that's not the thing that I was created to do. And some days I'm kind of bummed out about that because I love basketball. But people ask a lot, how did you know that God called you into this? And the word "called" is pretty strong. It's accurate, but I love to say that I feel like this is what God has invited me to do, because there's so many other things that I get to do as well with this. But I think I love writing, I love communicating emotions and faith, and I love being with people. And being a poet, being a writer, it allows me to do those things. And so I think if I take a step back and look at the gifts that God's given me and the things that He's created me to love and enjoy, this job lines it up perfectly for where I'm at in my life right now. And so, there was definitely days and seasons when I did not want to do this. I thought, how am I ever going to make a living doing this? How's it ever going to work? But if God invites you into it, He's going to carry you forward and through it. And I got to say, man, the way that people have supported me, cared for me, and shown my work love has been just overwhelming. But it's also, the conversations that have come out of the things that I've written and the stories that I've gotten to share have just solidified again and again that this is the thing that I'm supposed to be doing right now.
It's almost as if it doesn't feel like work then. You kind of know it's a God thing, right? Yeah,
well, and I will say this, when I was, at Concordia, and even in high school, I had a lot of teachers and pastors and friends, encourage me hey, you should go into to pastoral ministry. And I've thought about it, and I would love to maybe one day go down that road, but it's for me, as being a poet, I get to have different conversations with that title rather than having the title of pastor. And to be honest, my skill set, learning languages or sitting in a classroom, I can't do, that's not the way that my brain works. So going off to seminary I would not have made it through. But I don't know if you know this, but anybody can just become a poet. They'll let anybody be one. You just have to start. And so I did.
I don't think that that may be true, but I'm not. There was a time, when I started to read the different poems and poets that I was reading. I wanted to be, I want to be like that, and I knew that I couldn't do that. It was kind of like when I wanted to play baseball. It's
sure.
There comes a time when you realize, nope, that ain't what you're supposed to be doing, and. For me, it was to be a pastor, although the classroom thing, I'm kind of with you on that. Oh, yeah. Languages in classroom wasn't my strong suit, but because it was God, and I did use the word call, and you recognize that, but it really is an invitation to do something with God, and I do see that. I've heard your podcast that you've been on. I've listened to your podcast as well, and I really enjoy that. And I've read some of your poems. I'm still reading some of them. And I do see God is walking alongside you. You're reflecting His voice through what you do, either spoken word or written word. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, don't stop.
I won't.
So as a poet and a speaker and author and all the things that you do, what is it that What are some of the things that, I expected that this would be the way it would be. And then maybe some of the things that, this is completely surprising. I didn't expect it to be like this. What are some of those things?
Yeah, I think one of the things I expected was a little bit of pushback or hesitancy from others. When I say I'm a poet, they're like, what? And then they put you in a box, and then when I go up on stage or I present in front of a group, you can kind of see them like taking me out of that box and putting me somewhere else. I think, I mean, you must feel the same way too when someone says, well, what do you do? And you're like, well, what I'm about to tell you is going to change how you see me. But you also have to, I want you to get to know me and then my style of, being a pastor. Like when you tell someone you're a pastor, things happen. When I tell people that I'm a poet, things definitely happen. And so it's that perception of who I am versus what it is that I do. And so learning to navigate all of that. And, one of the things that I didn't expect when I started doing this was that I would still be doing this. I started 23 years old. I'm 34 now. So I've been at this for a little over 10 years. And when I first began, I thought, well, I'll do this for a little while. It was kind of around the time of when everyone was starting a blog. Do you remember when everybody had their own blog and they would, do it for like a week or 2 weeks or a month or whatever, and then they just stopped? I'm still doing it. Like I am, I'm still writing. I'm still posting blog posts. I'm still doing the thing. Again, like I said, that I believe this is what God has invited me to do. And I'm enjoying, to be honest, like 10 years in, and I feel like things are really beginning.
An incredible encouragement for anyone who's looking at this, especially for, I want to say young people, but it really is anybody of any age that you feel this drawing, this urging of God that just do it and God will take care of it. I mean, I know someone who wanted to be an actor and a stage actor and was going to school for this. And we were at a Christmas dinner and we were around people that we didn't know. And someone leans over to this person and says, so what is it that you do? And because that's what you ask of people, what do you do? And he says, I'm studying to be an actor. And he says, and the response was, well, that's a nice hobby.
Yeah, I've gotten that one before.
Yeah, it's just a matter of, it's not a hobby. It's a life. It really is a life. And that guy can, and what I'm thinking about too is, when people say, well, you're a poet, and they obviously they put you in a box, just like with a pastor. And it's like, I want to say, well, what did you think I looked like? What does that look like? And we look at the Bible, for instance. So much of the Old Testament is written in poetry. And a lot of it is written by this guy named David. He was a warrior. He was a king. But he expressed himself through, poems that a lot of the world knows by heart. Psalm 23 comes to mind. So there are things that I'm sure that people need to understand. There are going to be things you don't expect, but that shouldn't deter you at all. So
right, and the last thing I would add is like it's not going to go the way that you think it's going to go. Like when does the dream ever go the way that you think it's going to go? And so I if I could go back and tell myself 10 years earlier, be like, it's not going to go the way that you want it to go, but like, you're going to be amazed by the faithfulness.
Yeah. What a great, question to ask in interviews as well. Is it going the way you thought? But do dreams ever do that? No, the best dreams are the ones where you have no idea where we're going. It's just, let's just go, God, you and me, and let's get out there. Let's talk about poetry itself, if you don't mind, for a bit. Why do you think, or maybe you don't think this, but I'll ask the question, how do you think poetry is uniquely suited to reflect God's love and God's glory?
Great question. You did mention it. It's in the Bible. So we already have like an example of one way that we can communicate faith, hope, truth, love, and the glory. But I think what poetry does, and it's different for everybody. Poetry is not a. When you think about like the way that a service, we've constructed services, right? So we have prayers, we have sermons, we have hymns, we have songs. But like I think the missing piece oftentimes can be like the poem, because the poem is not the sermon, the poem is not the song. The poem poetry lives a little bit somewhere in between the sermon and the pastor and the songs that we sing, and it just kind of holds hands between the two, and it just kind of lives right there. And I think when you think about like those who are sitting in your pews on a Sunday, like to give them just a little bit something different. I always think of poetry kind of as like the dessert, right? Like you don't want too much of it because it's a lot to handle. It's a little too sweet sometimes. But it often I think about like the end. I'm rambling right now, trying to find my thoughts. But like you think about the end of the service and the benediction, right? And the benediction to me is this like beautiful. It's like this beautiful poem. Like that's a little piece of chocolate after dinner. You're like, all right, here we go, on to the next thing. And I think I do believe that's what poetry, that's what good poetry can do for the listener. And it reminds them that they're not alone. It sees them, it values them, it cares for them. And then it goes.
C.S. Lewis, who posited the idea that when God created the world, he didn't. I mean, Genesis talks about, and God said, he spoke, but C.S. Lewis kind of makes the idea that God sung the world into existence. And C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, these guys were, up to their neck in poetry. They loved that idea. And I can see that God does use poetry to reflect or to give us himself. Mm-hmm. He talks to us that way.
Yeah.
When people ask, how do I get? Because I think it is something that is not. I don't want to offend you. How do I ask this question without offending you? It's not mainstream, okay? It's not like picking up a book and just reading it. But so if I want to get started in this somewhat, like you said, it's a little bit different type of medium. Who do you think I might have to pick up? Who would you recommend to start with?
Well, it would be a missed opportunity if I didn't say myself. But some that I've really enjoyed, and they're all very different in their own way. Like, Mary Oliver, like she has this book, a collection called Devotions, and she writes a lot about like nature. But for me, like her words are so soothing and so calming. Like, so her words are fantastic. Wendell Berry is another fantastic writer. You can go back to like school, like Shel Silverstein. Like, I'm sure, everyone most people know who Shel Silverstein is in the weird, childlike, fun-like poems that he crafted. And then more recently, there's a guy by the name of Drew Jackson, and he's a fantastic writer. He has 2 books of poetry out right now, and his work just keeps getting better and better. He's one of my favorites that I go. But I had him on my podcast. He's just a brilliant guy who loves the Lord and has a way with words.
Thank you for that. I've written some of those names down, and I'm going to we'll talk about books that you might recommend, and perhaps some of these will be on there. It is interesting, the preconceived notions of poetry. I think a lot of people do. When you talk poetry or say poetry to them, they're thinking things like, well, it's got to rhyme, it's got to have, and if they're thinking about it, and maybe they've had a little bit of experience, it's got to be in some kind of meter. Like Shakespeare was very known for writing in a certain meter. But that's not, and from what I've read of your work, that's not how you approach it at all, is it?
No, it's not. It's not at all. I was speaking at a school last week up in Indiana, and I was in a 5th grade classroom, and we were talking about poetry, and they had talked about, the poetry units that they had been learning and the things that they had been studying, and they asked, like, we didn't hear that in your poetry. Is it? It's not wrong. The difference between where I'm at and where you're at is I'm not getting graded anymore, right? So poetry, it's this beautiful thing where you get to write, you get to create. Now, some people might say that I am wrong and that it needs to follow a meter or a tone or whatever it may be. But for myself, when I approach the paper, I want to write something honest and something hopeful. And I want to write something that is real to me, that reflects the things that I know, the things that I'm going through, and then to try to accomplish that so that the audience can hold it. or that it can see the audience, or it can leave them feeling more hopeful than when they first started listening or reading the poem. I'm not too concerned with rules or where commas go. I just want to try to offer you something that's going to remind you that you can keep going and that you aren't alone. So, but I will say, like, I did learn all of those things when I was in school, because it's important to learn the fundamentals and the basics so that you can, innovate. Gives you the freedom. You have to have foundation if you want to have freedom.
It seems to me it would be almost like a musician that has to, you have to learn to read notes and you have to learn music theory, but then having those basics of knowledge and maybe even the history of music as well opens you up and frees you. Mm-hmm. It liberates you to then be a voice, your voice. And mm-hmm. I get that with poetry as well, and so it's not, sometimes I think I'm doing it wrong. I'm reading it wrong when I'm not reading the right poems, or I'm not finding a poem that fits these preconceived rules there. But once I get beyond that, it really is liberating, and I hear God's voice in a lot of the poetry that I'll be reading, and because of who I am and what I do. I want to be faith-based and try to bring that out into my messages as well. Even though I don't write in poetry, I do write, have to as a preacher. So let's talk a little bit about you personally again. Some mentors are along the way that you have acknowledged or can identify throughout your development as who you are today.
Yeah, I will probably forget a lot of people. I think that's the thing is I would not be where I am or doing what I'm doing if it wasn't for the dozens and hundreds of people who have kind of walked beside me, encouraging me to keep writing. When I wrote my first book, it was like I wanted the acknowledgement section or the thank you section. I wanted to list every single person I've ever met, right? Because in some way they've kind of added to this. But a couple really off the top of my head, like from the very beginning, is my friend Gabe Casper. He's a pastor in Ann Arbor, and he's been with me from the very beginning, walking alongside me, encouraging me, telling me like, "Hey, man, you can keep doing this. It matters." My friend James Seleska, who's helped design many of the books, just a fantastic dude. Matt Popovitz, who you mentioned that you're going to have on the show. Matt and I have been able to work on a lot of things together, and he's always been in my corner, inviting me to speak at conferences or to perform at his church. My friend Blake Flatley and Matt Daring, who I do shows with, and then Dave Zoll is another one. He leads Mockingbird Ministries, and it was about 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago. Dave and I sat down, and he was like, we had known each other a little bit, but he was like, "How's it going?" From one writer to another writer. He's like, "How's it going?" And I was like, and at the time I felt pretty stuck. Like I felt like I had exhausted all my options. And so Dave gave me about 10 names to contact about future projects and events. And that really just meant a lot to me. So seeing those guys and their mentorship, but really just like their respect for what I do and them believing in it when I didn't. That really, I think that's one of the big things is what a mentor does is they see what you really want to see, or they see what you don't want to see and they call that out.
I get the idea that a mentor isn't someone who tells you where to go or how to get there. It's just that I'll walk with you.
Yeah.
And if it's that kind of mentorship relationship, I'll pray with you, and I'll pray for you. I get that, and I think it's just important for people to understand, because I think that people are looking for, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing in this world? Yeah. We all are. I truly believe we're all born with this innate idea. I have to have purpose, and I believe that that's the way God created us. But he puts people in our lives at different parts of it. And, you've come into my life at a certain time when I'm looking at, I've been preaching for communicator. I want to be a better preacher. And so I need to think outside the box. I recognize that now. And so that's why I'm trying to get into different areas and talk to different people that do it differently.
Sure.
And I think it's expanding my own voice, or better yet, God's voice coming through me. I'm just a vessel. Use me, Lord, right?
Yeah.
It's just the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah. And don't let me mess it up. I don't want to mess it up.
Yeah. Fix this if I do mess it up, right?
Yeah.
There's a prayer when I get ready for church on Sunday mornings by Martin Luther. And it's like, if it was left to me, I'd bring it all to ruin long ago. So, and I get it. I get what Luther's getting at there too. Hey, what is your a phrase or just a short piece of language that would tell people who you are? We want to put it on a billboard, everybody to see it as they drive by. What would we put on that billboard for Tanner Olson?
I think it would be, I wrote something about 2 years ago, and it's just this short little line that is, life is not a race and you are not behind. It has become one of my favorite sayings. I've written about it time and time again, but I think it kind of sums up, or perfectly sums up, kind of the things that I need to, the thing I need to remember, that life is not a race and you are not behind. And I think that's something that
because it's completely almost 180 degrees away from the way the world is. You know, we're all rats in a race. And we're running against time, and we got to get ahead of it, and we're never going to get there. Where do you think that came from?
It came from me feeling like life is a race and I was behind. I mean, truly. I mean, and that's one of the things that I fight against most days, and I think most people feel that as well. Is you begin to compare yourself to where you're at, to where other people are. You see the ways that they've achieved. You see what their life have, and then you realize, oh, you don't have that. Your life doesn't look the way that theirs does, and you are not doing as well as they are. And I mean, anytime you compare, you lose. Like there's no winning when comparison happens. It sucks your soul away, and you're left wondering, why am I even here? And so, and I'll say there's a difference between comparison and learning from somebody else. Like I might watch somebody else perform poetry or read something they've written, and I'll begin to think, oh, man, I'm just not as good as they are. I'm not like that. And that's okay, but what can I learn from them? What are they teaching? And praise God that I'm not like them. Nobody needs two of anybody else, you know? Like, God did not, copy and paste somebody. It didn't do that, And so it's like you get to be who God created you to be and live out your, the gifts that He's given you and the love that He has for you. But He did not create you to be like that other person. He created you to be you.
Yeah, this podcast is called Reflection, and when I came up with that title, what I was thinking was, the moon reflects the light of the sun, but it doesn't look like the sun.
Sure.
And so we reflect the love and the light of God, but we still look like us. It's just that God is shining through us, His light through us, and I get that.
What do you mean you're not a poet?
I'm glad I'm recording this because I got to write this stuff down and try to remember it. So if life is not a race, then, so what is life?
It's a gift.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. It's hard. It's a heavy thing. Life is a heavy thing, but it is a beautiful gift. I think it's one of those things where you hold it with both hands. It's not just this, or it's not just that, but it's a both and situation. I do a lot of speaking with, alongside my friend, Heidi Gaiman, who's also a therapist and an author. And she talks about the both and, life is heavy, but it is also hopeful. It's heavy and it's hopeful. There is sorrow, gift, and it is heavy,
And it's fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that with, in fact, I just said this, part of my profession is to preside at funerals, and sure. We had 4 funerals in the last 2 weeks. Some were expected, some were not expected. And I said at every single one of these funerals, enjoy every single moment you have. Don't take it for granted. Mm-hmm. Don't take for granted, I can do that later. Life is meant to be lived now, in the here and now. I think Jesus said something about that too, about not worrying about tomorrow. As we kind of wrap things up here, 3 books. Give me 3 books that you would most likely gift to someone.
Yes. I mean, I will be honest. I do give my books away to a lot of people. If I do give my book "Walk a Little Slower" away to a lot of folks. I carry it when I travel. I have a couple in my backpack, and if it comes up on an airplane or any kind of conversation, I just hand it to somebody. But the other 3 books are "A Million Miles in 1,000 Years" by Donald Miller. I read that book. I've read that book several times. It's a book all about story, and it was a good reminder for me of, stepping into the uncertain and unknown with faith, and knowing that in a lot of ways it is a story, and like we said, it's meant to be lived and enjoyed. And so there's that book, and then the other 2 books are books of poetry. I've mentioned both of these is Mary Oliver's Devotions. It is just if you have a front porch in the spring or summer, that's where you want to read this book. You just want to sit there and you just want to read her work over and over again. It's beautiful and it's inviting. And then the other one is by my friend Drew Jackson. It's titled "Touch the Earth." It's his second collection, and it walks through, I believe, the majority of the book of Luke. And some of the things that he pulls out from there are just fantastic. So I've got a long list of books that I've been wanting to read and trying to read. But those are a couple that just kind of stick out to me.
I will have links to those in the show notes. I will also have links to your website where they can pick up your books as well. One question that you wanted me to ask and I did not.
No, you hit it. I was going to say, what advice would you give? And we talked about paying attention. But you did not ask me if I could share a poem. And so
yes,
I would like to do that now, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to this.
All right. Well, since I've been talking about the book "Walk a Little Slower," I figured I'd read one of my favorite poems from that collection, which is titled. It's the whole idea of this book is to invite people to slow down and to reflect. I am somebody who likes to go fast. You talked about the rat race. I'm bad at living slow, and that's one of the reasons why I write about it so often. So this is "Walk a Little Slower," and it goes like this. I think today I'll walk a little slower and breathe a little deeper. I'll leave my phone face down inside and give my eyes a rest to see beauty beyond a screen. I'll grab a light jacket so I can still feel the cold wind hold your hand until it gets sweaty, and I'll let go, but I'll never let go. I'll walk below between shadows, cut through the field, cross the street when the car is clear. Today, I want to find myself beneath the limbs of the trees and later on below a few million stars. Maybe we'll see a dog or bump into old friends or both, and I'm not counting steps or miles, but I'm just walking because for now, I can. And I don't know what the future holds. If my days or, well, you get it. Maybe grief is around the corner or a missed call on my face-down phone back inside. Maybe there is good news in my inbox or a miracle waiting in the welcome of the next month. And in the morning, I'll sit a little longer and drink a little deeper. I'll watch the light make its way through the dark morning because the light, it always finds a way. And I'll remind myself life won't always look the way it does. Change is coming and it might even be here. I'll remember the steps forward and the steps back that led me to where I am. And before I begin to move these feet once again, I will slowly breathe in grace and exhale peace, knowing that every piece of me is here to be. And whatever may be now, I'll walk a little slower and breathe a little deeper. Because right now I'm alive. And everything is okay. It's not perfect. And that's okay. And that's what I'm learning to tell myself these days. Everything is okay. It's not perfect. And that's okay.
Thank you, Tanner Olson. I really enjoyed my time with you today. I'm very hopeful that we will be able to meet face to face someday. I know that you were in the Northern Illinois area a while back with a mutual friend, I think, Ben Squires.
Yeah, Ben, great guy.
Yeah. So maybe I'll get with him and we'll see if we can't bring you back up so that people can enjoy your poetry and your speaking in person.
That would be awesome. Let's do it. Well, thank you so much for your time and for inviting me on. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Thank you, my friend. God's blessings to you. Thank you, Tanner, for joining me today on the episode of Reflection. And thank you for joining me today. You know, Reflection is a weekly podcast, and it's produced by St. Matthew Lutheran Church in Hawthorne Woods, Illinois. And you can connect with us here at St. Matthew by going to our website. It's www.stmats.net. That's www.stmatts.net. If you find yourselves in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, we would love to see you at one of our services or events here at St. Matthew. Hawthorne Woods is about 1 hour northwest of downtown Chicago, but we're only about a half hour's drive from O'Hare Airport, easily accessible. We'd love to see you. You can also connect with us through our Facebook page, our YouTube channel, and on Instagram. This podcast is produced by St. Matthew Lutheran, and the music is provided by podcasthost.com and Alitu, the podcast maker. You can find your own free podcast music over at thepodcasthost.com/free music. We'd love to have you give us a glowing review and rate this, like it, give it a heart, so that other people will find us here wherever you get your podcasts, and they can hear an interesting and encouraging and inspirational story about reflecting God in this world. Well, that's it for today. Join me again next time for more reflection.